All right. Good afternoon, MTW agencies. Great to have you back here with us. I hope everybody is doing well. Thank you for joining us for the part one of a two-part financial training on MTW financial policies and procedures. Again, this is part one of two, and so we are thrilled that you are with us this afternoon. Next slide, please. So today we've got a chock full day full of really good information, and hopefully we've broken it up in a way that we can digest it well. We're going to first talk about the MTW ACC amendment and how it relates to the funding flexibilities. We'll talk a little bit more in detail about what the eligible uses are of MTW funds, Section 8 and 9 funds. We will have a breakout room discussion where you can talk to each other, hear from each other around certain questions and conversations. Praveen will walk us through how the public housing and voucher dollars will continue to be calculated for you as an MTW agency. We will hear directly from two of the initial 39 agencies, San Bernardino and Cambridge, will talk to us about their experience with finance policies. And then again, we will hear back from Candace and Jenny will talk us through how to apply some of those change management techniques that we heard in the first webinar. And then we'll be able to answer any questions that you guys have. So next slide, please. Before I turn it over to Philip Pless, the financial analyst in the MTW office, I just want to give a huge shout out to Greenville, South Carolina. Woohoo! You guys are the first landlord incentives cohort agency to submit your MTW ACC amendment. So far, we have received 9 MTW ACC amendments signed from the agencies. 6 of them have been countersigned and executed by HUD. The other 3 will happen soon. So we have time for the 20 more of you to go. 9 down, 20 to go. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Philip Pless, MTW financial analyst. Philip, take it away.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us here. And, you know, Greenville, South Carolina holds a special place in my heart. I went to college there for a year and was back there in November, and it's just a wonderful place. So I'm so glad that you guys are with us. So today we're going to be talking about this is a part one of our finance webinar curriculum. And so we're going to start off talking about this general question about the MTW ACC amendment and how it impacts potentially your funding flexibility or how that works. So what's the interplay between those two things? So we're going to spend several minutes talking about this because this is a really important topic. And this is something where we get a lot of questions about it. And so it's better to just kind of know this up front as you're starting to, you know, if you have already executed your ACC amendment, great. But if you're thinking about executing it, you'll kind of know more information about what to expect. So the first question is just when should the agency process their ACC amendment? So we strongly encourage you all to execute your ACC amendment as soon as you are able to. You know, there is discretion in terms of when you can execute that ACC amendment, but, you know, just a reminder from the welcome webinar, the process is that you as the agency will sign it, and then you'll have your board resolution go to the landlord incentives cohort mailbox, and then we process it, and it's signed by the assistant secretary or equivalent, which is the GDAS, which is Dominique Blom, and then at the first day of the month, you will become an MTW agency and you'll have the ability to use funding flexibility. Next slide. So one important thing to recall, and another reason why we encourage you to submit your ACC amendment as expeditiously as possible, is that you cannot use funding flexibility until you execute your ACC amendment. So the funding flexibility, what are we really talking about here? So what we're really talking about is the use of your funds for a purpose than they may be originally intended. So, for example, the use of HCV funds to, you know, for operating costs in public housing. That's an example of where you're using a fund flexibly, where the original appropriated purpose is for housing choice vouchers, but it's being used for another purpose. So a couple important things there. So after you execute your ACC amendment, HUD countersigns it, you are an MTW agency the first day of the month after that ACC amendment has been completely countersigned. So a couple of important points to consider about this. The first is that activities that require waivers or things of that nature, you cannot start those until after you have submitted your MTW supplement to the PHA plan. We have a special webinar series that will be coming up later this spring where we will have our experts in the office, Jenny Rainwater, Crystal Mills, and Gwendolyn, who will really go through that form and how to fill it out and things of that nature. So stay tuned more for the supplement training, but that's just something to keep in mind. However, just to clarify here, we have an example here, you can use funds flexibly where you're already kind of undergoing an activity. So for example, an MTW agency could use their operating funds that they get to issue HCV vouchers after the ACC amendment has been executed, but it could not start a local non-traditional activity, which we will be talking about more in the future when we get through to the MTW supplement section, until it's received approval in that supplement. Next slide. So one thing to really keep in mind and to really kind of dive a little bit deeper into the topic of funding flexibility. So Mtw funding flexibility really is allowable for the following sources of funds. There's, the HCV program funds. That includes both housing assistance payments and admin fees that you earn, operating fund, and capital fund. So those are the three funding sources that will be available to you to use flexibly. You could propose activities, that free up funds to be used flexibly. And just an important note here with funding flexibility is that all HUD required approvals still must be received if needed or applicable. So for example, we're talking about some of those LNT activities that you might be proposing in your MTW supplement. If it's around housing development or something of that nature, you're still going to need, the relevant, or in this example, URD, which is the Urban Revitalization Division's approvals, environmental reviews, and things of that nature. And we'll talk a little bit more about the cross-cutting requirements a little bit later, but those provisions are still. Next slide. So eligible uses. We've gotten several questions in the other two cohorts about, eligible and ineligible uses. And so there's a couple of things that we want to clarify that are not eligible uses of activities or funds under the MTW program. So the first is using those HCV capital funds, operating funds for Section 8 project-based rental assistance programs run by the Office of Multifamily Housing. Those are not eligible uses of funds because the Section 8 PBRA program is run by the Office of Multifamily Housing, and so that's a separate program from the project-based vouchers, which is something that could be eligible. Another ineligible use of funds is going to be repaying. So let's say you had an audit and for some reason there was an ineligible cost under one of your PIH programs. You cannot use your Section 8 or Section 9 funding sources. I'm using Section 8 and Section 9. It's being used interchangeably with the three funding sources that we covered in the previous slide. You cannot use those to pay for audit findings, so costs related to audit findings. You will need to use non-federal funds to repay those audit costs. So these are just a couple of examples based off of questions that we have received, but this is certainly not an exhaustive list. And so here is the biggest takeaway on this point and something that you should keep in mind. If you have a question about whether or not an activity or something that you were doing or you're considering doing is eligible, please send an email to the MTW Landlord Incentives at HUD.gov inbox, because we would rather, get your question up front, and then we can research it and respond to you, and we can make that determination and provide you guidance up front before you get yourself, potentially in a situation where, something is ruled ineligible down the road. So please communicate with us and let us know if you are in one of those situations, because, that's really why we are here. We are here to provide you guys with assistance and really help you out when it comes to these kind of questions that are coming in. Next slide. Oh, sorry. And just one more reminder about this topic, because we also have gotten questions about this in the past. So the funding fungibility, flexibility, those two words we use interchangeably, does not apply to special purpose voucher programs. So we'll talk a little bit more about special purpose voucher programs and Mtw in the next webinar that will be coming up, which is really focused on financial reporting. But just to clarify here, special purpose vouchers are those vouchers that have been appropriated specifically by Congress for a specific line item or for a reason. So for example, in this slide, we have the emergency housing voucher program from the Rescue Plan Act of last year that's really focused on homeless families or those who were, recently or formerly homeless, or who are going to become homeless again. So that's a specific purpose that was identified by Congress in the appropriation. And so you cannot use EHV funds for non-EHV purposes. There are some potential administrative flexibilities that are available to MTW agencies that are possible. That is why we have included a link to the SPV FAQ document. So if you click on this link here, this will pull up a series of question and answers that we have on SPVs and MTW. And it really is an amazing resource because it goes into a lot of detail about the interplay of MTW and SPV. It also covers how MTW agencies should report SPV vouchers when they're doing their with monthly VMS reporting and things of that nature. And it also covers some things on the 50058. So just keep that in mind. It's a great resource. And yeah, and so now we can go to the next slide, I believe. Okay, so let's go back a slide and let's take a pause here. So now I'd like to shop and see, Marianne, have we received any questions?
We sure have. Hello, Monica. Please clarify, flexibility is allowed from cap op to HCV, or are we saying that HCV funds are not flexible to extend to MTW agencies?
So
can you clarify again?
Sure. So I'm sorry something got lost in translation. I apologize. But the three funding sources that have funding flexibility are capital funds, operating funds, and HCV. So HCV, when we refer to HCV funding source, that is comprised of the two subsources, which are your housing assistance payments and your HCV admin fees that you earn. So all those funding sources are flexible, yes. Does that clarify your question?
Thanks, Philip. Does that, Monica, answer your question? Let us know. Yvette, and so another good question. What about VASH vouchers that have folded into the HCV program? In other words, after the initial funding has been received and no additional funding was received to support those funds. I hope this makes sense. And she can clarify on the phone. Yvette?
Yeah, it's just the question like it is. So basically, when you get the initial funding for the VASH vouchers to support that program, you don't receive additional fundings after that. From our understanding, we are supposed to include those in the HCV funding, if you will. So my question is, once it's folded into that program and they're no longer new VASH vouchers with separate funding, is that considered special voucher money then?
Praveen, are you on the line?
Yeah, hi. I should be able to answer this, and if not, we can talk offline and can direct you to the FAQ document. So the VASH vouchers, not just in the initial funding increment, they are not to be used fungibly. They are appropriated for a specific purpose. And even after the first year, the funds are not, you can't use those funds for non-VASH purposes. So you can't use the VASH funds for, say, supporting your operating or capital fund or anything else. However, based on the way the allocation letters are written, when you receive your renewal letters for this fiscal year, we're working with our financial management division to, just like you were saying, after the first year, everything is kind of, in terms of tracking, we're going to provide some guidance there on how it might help you to track after the first year. But short answer is the expectation is for VASH money is not to be used for fungible MTW purposes.
Okay, so then a follow-up question to that is when you are tallying up the HAP totals with regards to move to work, VASH is reported in a separate line item then. Is that not included? Because currently the way that the instructions say that you have to add VASH into the total HAP, but when you read the move to work, it's on its own line item. So are you saying that HAP for VASH is not included in the move to work HAP total line item?
Are you talking about in the allocation that you get every year?
I'm talking about when we're reporting in REAC. You have a separate line item for VASH totals, and you have a separate line item for move to work HAP totals. When you read the REAC, the VMS reporting, VASH is inclusive of the total for the HAP. So are we saying that we are not including on the total line item for HAP move to work? You're only doing move to work for there and VASH separately in its own column? I'm confused on that.
Yeah.
So can I
answer that? Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Praveen, if you have a quick answer, and then I want to make it.
Yeah, I think I can answer it, and otherwise maybe, I think there are a couple folks from FMC who might know this better, but when you're reporting in VMS, you have separate expenses that you're reporting on for special purpose vouchers. And then there's like MTW kind of vanilla vouchers that you're reporting on. So there should be separate reporting for those.
So thank you, Praveen. And Yvette, could I ask if you could send an email to that MTW landlord incentives at HUD.gov. I want to make sure that we're hearing the question and that we're answering it. We do have a whole section, I think, during the next webinar specifically on SPVs, I think, and we'll make sure that we answer your question either there or in an insider or something. But I want to make sure that we're hearing the question and we get you the right answer so we can follow up with you directly.
Thank you.
Okay. And I see we do have one more question, but I'm going to hold that for now because I think we might get to it later today, but we will make sure that we get it answered before we finish today. Actually, let me change my mind on that. Philip, yes or no question. We are a voucher-only agency. Can we use admin fee reserves that we currently have built up for MTW Flexibilities?
Yes. So are you referring to, I'm assuming you're referring to HCV administrative fees? Then yes. Are you eligible funds that you could use flexibly?
Yes. Perfect. Thank you, Philip. Okay. Okay. So we are going to, again, break up into groups like we did the last time. We have 4 groups. We've got the Rockstar facilitators of Philip, Allison, Eva, and Jenny. Andalyn, can I ask that you go forward 2 slides, please? One more. So this is what we're going to talk about in those groups. 1, what is the long-term goal that you're hoping to do with funding flexibility, using those funds flexibly? 2, what does your agency need to prepare your MTW financial status, and what steps are you taking? And 3, what topics would you be interested in learning more from as it relates to funding flexibility? I think we might have just heard a couple of them. So Anna, previous slide, please. So you are about to go into your breakout group. If you see that you're in the wrong breakout group, you can either stay there and make new friends, or you can select the red button that says leave section, and then ICF will put you right back into the right group. So in just a minute, you are going to see a pop-up on your screen that'll take you to the breakout. The breakouts are 15 minutes long. And you're in about minutes. So I guess Anna and John, if you could like send us to our groups. Hello, everybody. Is everybody back? Are we here? Think so? I haven't gone off camera yet, or off, my computer hasn't died yet. I hope everybody had some good conversations with your group. I think our group really got through 2 questions and we didn't even get the whole way through them. So those were some really good conversations, really good questions, Philip, that we were asked. If I may, I would like to, so there were a lot of good answers that our group heard around using Mtw funding flexibility to kind of be able to like kind of fill the gaps and not be so restricted to that specific purpose, to be able to use them for the purpose that is needed at the local level, which obviously that was a A++ answer. There was a question when we're asking about what steps do you need to take to get ready. There was a question relating to systems, that there's a developer, their software vendor has seen a lot of HUD programs come and go, say they're coming, not really come. Do we really want to make major changes before your MTW? But on the other hand, you need to know what you're going to do with your MTW status in order to be able to make those changes to the systems. I will say that their systems will need to be updated, and we have been working really closely with the vendors around what those updates might need to be. And so it would actually be very helpful to know kind of who your vendors are. Generally, you can send those to landlordincentives@hud.gov or MTW landlordincentives@hud.gov. And we will also be having some specific, there will be information forthcoming on the policy changes to the reporting forms, as well as to the systems piece. So I think if you have questions like that, and Nick, I would like to hear from you specifically. Again, if you want to send us an email, we can connect with you, hopefully put some of those concerns to rest. But also it would be helpful to know kind of who the vendors are, and we can ensure that they're getting the information that they need. Nick, can I just have a thumbs up or something if you got that? You can email me directly. You can send it to the MTW Landlord Incentives box. I see a thumbs up. So you're gonna send us an email, Nick, and then we'll connect subsequently. Great. And then we'll make sure that you know, all the information is shared with everybody, so that you all, you know, have the information. I'm getting all kinds of thumbs up. Yes. All right. Anybody else want any couple words they'd like to share from the conversations that we had? Key takeaway?
This is Philip. There were several questions in our group about how, you know, the ACC amendment process would impact financial reporting, and, you know, what kind of things they need to consider in terms of their internal accounting systems and things of that nature. So I just want to reiterate 2 points about that. So the first point is that we have some PHA guest speakers. We have John Fidley from the Cambridge Housing Authority and Maria Razzo from San Bernardino, who are going to have some really excellent presentations a little bit later this afternoon to really, as two MTW agencies for quite some time, are going to be able to provide you some insights and things that they have learned over the years in terms of system setup and things of that nature, and really things geared towards financial policies and procedures. So stay tuned for that just a little bit later after the break. And then secondly, in terms of the ACC amendment and how it impacts financial reporting, we are actually going to have in the part 2 webinar a very thorough discussion about this topic, and we will have folks from the FMC staff, from the Capital Fund staff, and I will be presenting that as well, some guidance that we have come up on the topics of FDS, VMS, and capital fund reporting and how that is impacted by your MTW status. So stay tuned for that. In 2 weeks, we will really get into the nitty-gritty. So thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Philip. All right. Any other questions before we break?
Marianne, I think we had one question in the chat from right before the breakout sessions. From Yes.
Thanks, Philip. I didn't see it, but can we use proceeds from the disposition of our public housing units for Mtw Flexibilities? And I think this is one that we're going to need to get back to you in writing as part of an insider after this.
That's a great
question. They can.
I know there's been a lot of conversation. They can? The answer is yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we can.
Yes, the answer is yes.
We have it in, it's in an FAQ somewhere, but yes, we've been asked that question before.
Well, this is still a great question. We might still, something we might consider in the insider as well.
We've also had questions where if it was like your last public housing development, and you did a RAD conversion and you still had some money remaining, and yes, that can be used for your voucher program.
Awesome. Thanks, Praveen.
Awesome. Thanks, Praveen. Other questions? During the PD&R webinar, there was a list of activities that were prohibited during the evaluation period. Is there a quick link to identify what those are? Allison, where would they find that list?
Yeah, thanks, Marianne. I was actually just going to the quick link to Google it, but I will just say where it is. So that's right in your selection notice. And I can get the, during the break, I'll get the page number for everybody. So there's a nice cohort or landlord incentives cohort webpage on our MTW website, and that has all of your selection notice materials. So just pop into that selection notice and I'll give you the page number here in the chat over the break.
Perfect. Thanks, Allison. So the answer is yes, and we will get that to you. Any other questions?
Marianne, it looks like William might have a question. He's got his hand raised. William, do you have a question?
Yes,
William, sorry about that.
Yeah, that's
William.
quite all right. That's quite. Just a quick question on. We have some excess budget authority in our voucher program, and I always kind of refer to it as the HUD draw. I apologize. I'm from Middletown, Connecticut, and so we believe we have excess budget authority. We always refer to that as the HUD draw. We've always referred to that draw, that mystical draw that exists in headquarters someplace called the HUD draw, and so we want to be able to see if we can tap that resource for other things other than to be using it with the voucher program. And that's really my question. That budget authority, is there a possibility of unlocking it for other obviously qualified public housing activities? Could for we instance use that to do some new construction work for public housing units? That's, in our case, it's considerable. It's a large amount of money.
So that is a great question, and I think what you were talking about are reserves that are basically before you became MTW. Is that what you're referring to?
Well, I'm not talking about reserves in the accounting sense. They're not admin reserves, and they're not reserves. They're not HAP reserves. They're essentially budget authority that's out there for the total number of units under ACC, but are not currently being used or resources being tapped, and that's a considerable resource. And Willis give us the flexibility to make use of that considerable resources. If in fact we can't apply it to our voucher program, can we use that resource to do other things? And what might they be?
I think I'm following the question. You have your regular, and if I'm not answering your question, please let me know. But you have your monthly disbursements for HAP purposes. But traditionally, and this is going to be covered on a future training, if you're seeking to use what you have in your budget authority for something else, I have money in my budget authority for a public housing development. There is a process that you go through our Financial Management Center to request an additional disbursement of your budget authority funds for an eligible MTW purpose, which you can do. Is that your question?
Well, since I'm new to MTW, I think it is. It's hard to answer a question by using the question to answer a question, but nevertheless, so we're trying to get really, I think today, some insight into other very imaginative things that we can do with the resources that are essentially going unused in some cases, or applied differently in our community where we think we can take a HUD resource that's sort of sitting in a drawer someplace and apply it where it is most effective, whether it's concentrated for the homeless, whether the disabled, low-income family units, the areas which we find ourselves in the community, and it's all different in each community, of course, where we find ourselves, the need in the community, and where there may not be HUD resources set aside for specific things in a specific cycle, and these may be 5 or 10 year cycles and sort of grow in certain areas, but often this case, in my particular case, and I'm pointing out, is we have resources that are unused in one program. We feel that we're probably not going to use those resources in that program. At least it's not likely. And why can we not redirect them in an area where we think we have a tremendous need and ultimately can be successful in the future? It makes sense to me, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we'll be able to do that under MTW.
Yep. So if I could, under MTW, right, Section 8 funds and Section 9 funds can be used for Section 8 or 9 purposes. That's the funding flexibility or another activity, as whether if it's in the operations notice or approved by HUD. And so it sounds to me, if what I'm hearing are that these are Section 8 funds that have not yet been expended. And can those be used for Section 9 or other purposes? If I caught that question correctly, the answer is yes, you can use those funds interchangeably. If I didn't, I was wondering, William, if you could send an email like specifying what that question is. So we really want to understand the question that we run down the answer to get you the correct answer.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. I'm happy to do that. Thank you very much for that offer.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I believe the answer is yes, but I think we're hesitating to say that because we want to just make sure that we're fully understanding the question.
Yes.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, William.
I appreciate that upfront answer.
Yep. And we warned our PHA presenters that we've got a sophisticated bunch with you guys, with our landlord incentives cohort, and you guys were going to be asking sophisticated questions, and you have proved us right. So thank you guys for that. I'm going to, I see there is another question in the chat. I'm going to hold that question either until later or to answer as an insider. I want to make sure that we have an answer to provide. Right now, what I'd like to do is just break for 8 minutes. Please don't hate me for cutting off 2 minutes. My clock says 2:52 Eastern. We can circle back here at 3 Eastern, and we will continue along our way. Keep these questions coming. They're good, and we want to, if we don't know the answer, we want to know what the questions are so we can get you the answer. So thank you so much. So let's kind of step away, have some water, get some fresh air a little bit, and we'll see you back here at 3 o'clock. Hello, everybody. I hope you enjoyed your less than 10-minute break. Sorry about that. We are back, and I just wanted to note that Allison Christensen, thank you, Allison, did put a link to the, what is this, Allison? The selection notice into the chat. And so, and on pages 8 and 9 of that selection notice, it explicitly says which waivers cannot be used. I wanted to point you guys all there. And to Jennifer Hall, had a question as it relates to the turnkey 3 property. We need to do some more research on that. Those of us that are on the call today do not know the answer to that question. So Jennifer, we need to do some research on that, and we will get back to you all globally through an Mtw Insider. And the email address for sending, and I'll send you, type that in, Nick. What was I going to say? Philip, was there anything else you wanted to say before we kind of got started for part 2?
Yes, just one additional point. There have been several questions kind of hinting at reserves that agencies have built up. We have some, in the next presentation, we will cover that specifically and go into more detail. So just stay tuned. In 2 weeks, we'll have a lot more to say about that.
Great. Thank you. And then with that, I would like to turn it over to Praveen, who we've already heard from a little bit, and he's going to kick us off by talking about funding calculation. Praveen, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, great. Hi, everyone. I will try to make this as exciting as possible, given that we're talking about funding renewals. I'll first just touch on, we're going to go through the 3 buckets: public housing, operating funds, public housing capital funds, and the HCV program. We'll talk about funding renewals, obligation and expenditure requirements, and requisitioning. And then at the end, I'll put a plug in for some really good resources that we have already on our website that'll actually go through specific examples that we might not have time to touch on today. So funding calculations, it's pretty easy to remember on the public housing side because there's nothing different. The way your annual funding is calculated for both your operating fund and capital fund is the same as it is for non-MTW PHAs. So you don't have to learn anything new there. On the HCV side, admin fees are earned the same as they are for non-MTW agencies. So that's just based on your VMS leasing data. So that also is no different. The one difference, which I'll get into in a later slide, is for HAP renewal eligibility. As a non-MTW, you're renewed based on just your HAP expenses. adjusting for proration inflation. But the difference is we're also going to account for MTW expenses, and we'll get to that in the later slide. The obligation and expenditure requirements are the same for all three, OP, CAP, and HCV program. In terms of requisitioning funds, there's no change on the operating fund side. For public housing capital funds, there's a field BLI, budget line item 1492, that PHAs use in HUD's EPIC system, Energy and Performance and Information Center system. That's where you put in requisitions for MTW purposes. Funds are still dispersed through locks. I believe we will have a future training that'll get more into the kind of weeds of capital fund and requisitioning, but that's kind of high level. There's a budget line item there for MTW agencies to use. Requisitioning for the voucher program, this might tie to the previous question we just had before the break. So no requisitioning is needed. Your monthly disbursement is going to be based on your monthly HAP expenses from VMS, unless your expenses exceed your disbursements. If you do have a non-HAP expense, so say you want X number of dollars for, I need to use voucher money for a public housing development. I need $5 million or something like that. Okay, there's a process that you will go through that we will cover, where you're requesting the additional disbursement from your local financial analyst in the Financial Management Center of HUD. So there's a process where you request the money and we'll make sure it's for an eligible MTW purpose. But otherwise, your regular disbursements are just based on your monthly HAP expenses that you're reporting in VMS. I'm just going to go through the slides and then we'll field questions. Next slide, please. So, like I said, the one difference in renewal is on the voucher side, specifically on HAP. So this seems kind of confusing, but it's actually fairly straightforward. And the operations notice itself has a full example, and we have good training materials on this. But what the main takeaway is, we're really comparing two amounts. We're putting a cap on the HAP renewal eligibility, just to ensure there are statutory requirements that state that an MTW agency can't receive more money than it otherwise would have if it wasn't MTW. So to try to ensure that, we're putting a renewal eligibility cap. So that's based on your per unit cost before you joined MTW. That will be inflated to whatever the re-benchmark year is, and it's multiplied by the MTW eligible ACC units. So it's your per unit cost times your MTW eligible ACC units. That's kind of your umbrella. That's the most that the MTW agency might be eligible for. So just as a way of approximating the most you would have been eligible for if you weren't MTW. That makes sense. So what we compare that amount to is very straightforward. It's just VMS reporting your actual eligible expenses. So that means what you're spending on HAP for, HAP expenses, and your eligible non-HAP MTW expenses. So this would be, I'm using my HAP money for public housing, for to support my operating fund, or capital improvements, or I'm using my HAP funds to support a local non-traditional development, or for supportive services, really anything that's an eligible MTW expense where your funding source is your HAP source, that would be included here. There are a few more components of what's considered a funding source. If you go to the next slide, please. So the additional information, I don't want to get into like the super weedy details of what's considered an eligible funding source, but the high level takeaway is it's your HAP money, your HAP money that's used, any amount of that is spent on an eligible MTW expense, that counts towards your renewal. And one other takeaway is that while you might use capital funds, like you can use your capital funds, right, or operating funds to support your voucher program. While you can do that, that's not going to count towards your renewal because that's a different funding source. That's your public housing funding source. So while you can do that, that's not going to count towards your renewal. Your renewal is going to be your HAP and whatever HAP money you used for any eligible MTW purpose. Just as a plug here, these are good resources. The operations notice itself goes through an example kind of from beginning to end, including when you signed your ACC amendment. And then the online training is very good on our MTW webpage, which has an actual manual, which goes through some examples. We have FAQ there. And of course, if throughout this process, and again, this is more for knowledge, like what you're actually going to get renewed on every year. But if you have any specific questions after this training, definitely reach out to us. I know I kind of flew through that. I'm just looking at the clock here. I think we have time, just so I hope at least a little bit of it was captured in these few minutes. If we could do one poll, please. Poll question. Okay, so here's the question. How is the HAP renewal eligibility calculated for expansion MTW agencies? Is it is it based on a frozen eligibility base? Is it the lower of your HAP renewal cap or your actual HAP and non-HAP expenses? Or is it your last year's eligible expenses multiplied by an inflation factor? Just give everybody maybe a minute. And then we'll go over the answer, and then we'll move on to the next slide, just in the interest of time. Okay, polling is ended. Okay. Of those who answered, yes, most got it correct. It's B. It's the lower of your renewal cap or how much you actually spent. That's the main takeaway. We put a cap in based on what we think the most you might have been eligible for absent MTW, and we compare that to what your actual eligible expenses are, and we take the lower of the two, and then as with every other agency, it's adjusted for inflation and proration. We tried to make it as easy as possible, learning from things from the last 20 years of the MTW program. So that's it for me. Do we have questions, Marianne?
No questions in the chat. I think we can send it over to Philip to talk about financial policies and procedures.
Okay, so we have one more topic before we get to our headliners for today. So next slide, please. So I'm basically going to be introducing the topic of financial policies and procedures. And so, we've got a lot of questions. We had a lot of discussion in my breakout group about how the MTW program or the MTW designation, how is that going to impact my systems, my policies and procedures, and things like that. And so, changes may be needed to accommodate funding flexibility. We're going to have Candace Cronin from ICF discuss a really useful tool to talk about change management in the context of financial things. But, this is something that you're going to hear a lot about from both John and Maria from Cambridge and San Bernardino in just a few minutes, but they're going to talk about their experience in terms of changes that they have made with their financial policies and procedures and IT systems and things like that. So just stay tuned for that in just a few minutes. Next slide. All right, so one big point that I really wanted to just hammer home as it pertains to your MTW designation. So this is just a word on cross-cutting requirements. So cross-cutting requirements refer to those sort of things that are maybe outside of the regular PIH rules and regulations. But one key thing to really think about as it pertains to your financial policies and procedures is that 2 CFR Part 200 requirements still apply. So regardless of the flexibility that the MTW designation provides you as it comes to expending your funds, you will still need to think about provisions around things like the Single Audit Act, financial management systems, and those other kind of internal control requirements that are outlined in Part 200. Those still apply regardless of the MTW designation. So that's just something that you really want to pay attention to, because those requirements do apply. And other cross-cutting requirements still also apply. Things like Davis-Bacon, environmental review, fair housing, the things of those nature still apply as well. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Marianne, and she is going to introduce our first PHA speaker.
Thank you, Philip. So now is the highlight of this afternoon. I am really thrilled to introduce our 2 speakers, or I guess 3 or 2 housing authorities. First, I would like to introduce Maria Razzo, is the Executive Director of the Housing Authority San Bernardino. Maria and I go way back to when the Housing Authority was first became MTW back in 2008. And she has done some really great things there, first in the finance department, and then now as the Executive Director. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Maria, to give some good words of wisdom, lessons learned to the new agencies. Maria?
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. As Marianne said, my name is Maria Razzo, and we have been an MTW agency. Actually, this month is our 14th anniversary as a moving to work designated housing authority. And I have been with the agency for 17 years. So I've been with the agency before we became an MTW agency. So I had to really reflect back on lessons learned, but we've taken some notes over the years. We get a lot of phone calls. So here's some background on our agency. We have almost 12,000 vouchers across our portfolio, including the special purpose voucher programs, and almost 3,000 authority-owned units. That does include some RAD conversions. This next month we'll be done converting our entire public housing portfolio, and we have about 140 staff. Next slide. I also wanted to say hi to our friends, new MTW friends in California, Santa Barbara, Alameda, Berkeley, and Vacaville as well. So I didn't want to miss that opportunity. Here's just a screenshot. There's 3 here of the MTW activities that we have implemented. We've implemented 28. Coincidentally, our 28th one was just approved a few months ago, and it's on landlord incentives. So I welcome you to check out our latest MTW plan, our 22 plan amendment number 1. I will post the link to our MTW plans. They're all on our website and our reports in the chat after I'm done. So we have 28 activities, 12 administrative efficiency ones, and next slide, 9 to help our families transition through the program. Next slide, and 7 to expand housing choice. And we're missing here the landlord incentives one. And so one of the things that we did, Marianne talked at the very beginning, is that we were very excited, and I would say excited and overwhelmed about our designation. And so we had a list of MTW, what we thought were MTW activities that we could implement. We did focus group sessions, and we came up with this this list. Once we started breaking it down, we realized that at least half of them did not need MTW flexibility. So that was an exercise that was extremely beneficial. Once we realized the activities that did need MTW flexibility, at that point in time, Marianne was our MTW coordinator. So she's really been my mentor and our coach as we've gone through this. And one of the best suggestions, and I know I've said this a lot, that she made to us is to really focus on the activities that brought administrative efficiencies. And we're so glad that we did that. So the initial activities, I think we had 11 that focused on just administrative efficiencies early on. And so that enabled us to create some cost savings. And we were able to bring in, we just have two coaches that really help our families with self-sufficiency activities. Next slide. So here to talk about financial lessons learned. My background is in finance. I started off as the finance director. So I'm not going to go through all of these. These are more cheat sheets for you. But I think one of the big ones for us was to really keep everything separate from the very beginning. Yes, you have fungibility, but we've had so many scenarios where we've had to go back and track the original source of the funds and what we use those funds for. You'll need to do that for FDS as well, for your financial data submission. So keep everything separate. Create a separate new MTW fund in your general ledger. If you're going to dabble in MTW local non-traditional activities, I would set up that new fund now, and separate accounts in your general ledger for transfers in and out of your MTW fund, and you'll understand why later as you delve into it. Next slide. This is just a breakdown of our suggestions of all of the different transfer in and out funds that you'll need to create. Next slide. And some other kind of lessons learned for the FDS. Research your FDS changes early on and set up your chart of accounts in your software so that they talk to each other and that they're linked together. So that helps at year end in creating your financial, so we call that mapping, between the two. We've talked about software a lot, really starting to work with your software vendor now to see what changes you would need to make. One of the big kind of misconceptions for us at the beginning, at least, was that fungibility was going to solve all of our financial problems. And as was stated this morning, earlier this afternoon, you're not going to receive more funds. So you really need to look at how you can create some cost savings to use those funds in different ways that you've been wanting to do. So again, we use our cost savings for research, for analysis, and really to pay for those self-sufficiency coaches. And that's really all we can do because we want to ensure that we're serving the number of voucher families to meet our baseline requirements. Next slide. We get asked a lot. We talk about implementation plans. So we create an implementation plan. Communication is very important for us, documentation and having everything clearly outlined. And so we get asked a lot, what is in our implementation plans? So I just wanted to include this as a slide. I'm not going to go through it, of the different components that we include in our implementation plans for each MTW activity. Next slide. And also going back to really trying to process what additional responsibilities your financial and accounting staff. So here are some just suggestions of what we've experienced. Also, it's really important for your financial team to understand the why behind some of the program related moving to work changes. So again, communication is very important. In our implementation team for any moving to work activity, we always include our finance team. Really important right now. I'm sure you're feeling really overwhelmed, and that's okay. That's normal. Things will start to make sense, but it's really important to do your homework. So read through, any appendices, the requirements for FDS, for your plans, the notices, any public hearing requirements, submission deadlines, etc. We were joking earlier that I'm really old school in that I print everything, I highlight it, I tab it. I'm sure there are more efficient ways to do that, but I still do it that way. Next slide. And these are just a list of some items that resulted for us in additional costs. So it's not always about cost savings, but there may be some items that may increase costs. So just a short list here. Next slide. Talked about communication. So we wanted to outline how we approach communication and the different stakeholders and customers that we include in our communication plan. So of course, our team and how we do that. We want to address concerns, educate about benefits of either the specific initiative or just moving to work as a whole in general, and share ideas about how Mtw flexibilities can be used. Existing Mtw housing authorities are always happy to chat about, how they've implemented certain initiatives. Our families, there's a lot of, the name, I think, calls the name moving to work causes some anxiety. That's what we learned early on. So explaining what it really means, that it's really a designation, right? It's not a program, and what flexibilities and benefits could be created for our families. A lot of engagement with our board. Consistently, we have board building sessions where we, at a minimum, review our plan, our reports, and obviously bring to them any new proposed activities or any modifications. Next slide. Also to the community, elected officials, and other stakeholders, share how this could facilitate partnerships, build relationships. We don't do a lot in terms of, or hardly any in terms of development or using fungibility for development. Our focus is on really helping our families transition through our program. So like I said, we have almost 10,000 families that fall under our Mtw designation, but right now we have 81,000 families on our waiting list. So we have had some very positive outcomes as a result of some of our Mtw initiatives. As an example, over the last 12 years, for new families pulled from the waiting list, we've reduced the time that they are on our program from 8 years to 4. And in that same time period, they have increased their earned income as well. Of course, HUD, I would stress the local HUD field office. You're working a lot with the Mtw office in DC, but it's really important to continue to rope in the local field office and explain how the changes are different from the traditional program. Other PHAs, especially for portability, and so that they can be educated about, how your program is different. And we've created a lot of fact sheets and talking points for our staff, fact sheets for external customers, for the public, talking points for our staff, and also Q&A documents. Next slide. So here's a snapshot of some of our fact sheets. These can be found on our website. We have one that highlights our research. Loma Linda University is our research partner. We have just an overview of what the Moving to Work designation means, our achievements, and our who we are fact sheet as an agency also includes a brief description on moving to work. Next slide. And so some of our takeaways, so my last slide, again, I emphasize that communication is crucial to all stakeholders. Our recommendation to tackle the administrative or operational efficiencies first, that's really what we did the first year. To really be strategic, consider your staffing, software funding capacities. Start with changes, again, that are low and create a high return, create implementation plans. Existing Mtw agencies are here to help. And that HUD is your partner. We actually have brainstorming sessions. So when we submit any new activity, it's not the first time that our HUD partners and teams see it. So we have continuous conversations. We're thinking about implementing this, because they have a lot of information, especially as they work with other Mtw PHAs as to what they have done and what they've experienced, and can share that information with you as well. We have embedded moving to work into our agency strategic plan. So we created a strategic plan back when we first became an Mtw agency in 2014. We're redoing that process now because we've changed. Really, our culture has changed. I speak to that in the next point of who we are. We just think very differently because you don't have this mindset of, oh, we can't do that because the regulations won't allow. Our focus is what's in the best interest of our families, and what do we need to change to make that happen. And so Mtw again is not a program to us. It really is a designation, and allows us to do things that really assist our team in terms of efficiencies, but also helps our families transition through our program. And I think that was my last slide. Yes, so here's my contact information, and also our Director of Policy and Communications, Nicole Beidler, who's with our agency for several years and oversees our MTW efforts. Thank you.
Awesome, Maria. Thank you so much for that. A lot of really incredible information there. We'll give folks a chance to ask Maria questions, but first, and I also want to note that all of these slides will be posted to our HUD Exchange after, and I think we may have sent them out to you. If we haven't, they'll definitely be posted to our website, so you'll have all of it there as well. And now I would like to introduce a couple of people from the Cambridge Housing Authority. John and Vinoji. John and I also go way back. I think John and I may go back to 2006. I remember going up to Cambridge. It was one of my very first agencies that I went to the site visit for back in the day. And Cambridge has been MTW since, what, 99, I think? So it's
Correct.
really one of our first agencies. So it's been some time. So I'm going to turn it over to you, John, and thanks for coming.
Yeah, so Maria still talks to Cambridge and visits Cambridge once in a while, believe it or not, after all those years. But anyway, welcome. I'm with the Cambridge Housing Authority. We were one of the first agencies to go MTW in 1999. Thank you, Maria, for your presentation. It's going to be a tough act to follow, but I think it was kind of interesting. Maria and I both did our slide presentations independent of each other, and I think you'll find some common themes on what we have to show, so we can just move ahead. I took a little bit higher level. The single fund fungibility is key. It does provide you flexibility. You don't get into this, what I call the tunnel vision of being a typical PHA. Oh, I got public housing funds and I can only use it for that. I just have these Section 8 funds. I just can use it for that. It does give you some flexibility. And even though it is less restrictive, it doesn't mean that you can do anything you want. You still got to follow the rules and regulations. And I know MTW agencies that have brought their funds into one pool, like into one big pot, and then redistributed it. We're similar to Maria's agencies, that we've kind of kept things separate, but we use what we call the block grant to pool funds into a central venue that can then be redistributed to other programs. And in our chat group, one of the agencies had a reason why they were thinking of going MTW. And it does provide you ability to fund activities that otherwise either don't have funds for, or just is not in your traditional funding sources. So it does, we love, back 20 years ago, but even back 10 years ago, what we thought we could do with our MTW fungibility, what we're doing today with it, we had a vision, but we had no clarity that we could do as much as what we're doing now. So we can move ahead. Again, we're on Elite, we're going to Yardi. And before Elite, we had some other ancient system. And people talk about systems, and this is only my perspective. I think one system isn't going to give you all the right answers. So you really have to assess your current chart of accounts, your cost centers and departments. And when we went MTW, we created new cost centers, and we created new departments. We did create a policy and technology lab, which was our think tank. A department of one, started as a department of one. Now it's like a department of two. But we're able to develop a relationship with some of the universities, MIT and Harvard, and kind of do a collaborative internship program with them. And we kind of leaned on their resources, but at the same time provide them the opportunity to do some assessments of our current programs and on what we wanted to do. So the general ledger is key. I think it's good to keep the walls up in between the different funding sources, but then also have a vehicle within your general ledger to pull those funds. The 3 departments that I kind of touched on was the policy and technology lab. We never had that. The block grant, what we call our internal block grant, and resident services, which is a program that serves grade school kids through high school, through post-secondary education. And it's kind of like, I call it our social service arm, one of our social service arms of the agency. And we kind of looked at that program and kind of modified some of the departments within the resident services. There's not one cookie cutter approach to it. You really have to see where your foundation is now and what you want to do, and maybe think ahead 3 to 5 years out on where you want to be. Just like with any, I think both in public housing as well as with any industry, you can't really think more than 5 years, because 5 years from now, it'll be a whole new platform for anybody. That's my view. But change is definitely a consistent theme. There's always change. When you get to like whole financial controls and policies, you almost have to kind of relook at that too. And, we were cautious enough not to eliminate any current policies, but maybe kind of enhance them. A couple examples would be like when we had new programs, they always went to the executive director, but we also made sure that within our new programs, it went into the budget process, and there was board engagement. All of a sudden, like 6 months into the year, if you had a pilot program and if it was the dollar threshold was small enough, well, just like with any agency, the executive director has the authority to expand on that program. And that's kind of where part of the benefits of an MTW agency is that you can change midway through a year, not to do a big program, but you can kind of start thinking about where you want to go the next year and the next 2 or 3 years, and kind of modify certain things that you're doing now. I think both the HUD representatives and Maria touched on a lot of these points. I think, you can't underestimate really understanding the contract, any restrictions, and there aren't that many restrictions, but you are restricted by the current guidelines and the funding formula. And when we went MTW, we kind of, it was tight. The funding formula was tight, and we looked at it year to year, and even over, like we forecasted out 3 to 5 years. But, it's not going to give you a lot of extra money, as we all learned, but you just really have to be financially cognizant of how is year 2 and year 3 going to be if we go down this path. I think at the end of the day, over a number of years, we really built up a good, strong foundation in understanding the new funding formulas and the way the funding sources would feed into the organization, that then we even started thinking internally what we could or could not do. Both board engagement and community engagement is key, and I'll just leave it at that. Certain programs, we got board approval. Other programs that were under the directive of the executive director or the senior management, we felt it was important to inform the board. And what we would do is we would inform the board through informational presentations or memos. But, MTW can bring it's a perception. Some people may think that, it's the end of the world, and other people can think it's the best thing since sliced bread. So, you really got to be cognizant on on people's perception, which all comes to communications and education. You can move on. Lessons learned. Changes across the agencies. This is from top to bottom. I've had 2 executive directors that I've had to report to. And my former illustrious executive director was the idea man. He would have an idea every minute, every day. You got to think out of the box, but you can't think out, and you have to get that mentality, not only through management, but also through the staff. And not that you can totally think out of the box, but it gives you the ability to think about looking at ways differently and looking at new ways of doing things. This goes from both programs as well as with the nuts and bolts. Me being a fiscal person, usually the nuts and bolts usually don't get loosened up too much. You always have internal controls, you always have the nuts and bolts. But as far as the programs, some of the programs that we've kind of expanded on are to deal with local community needs. We have a collaborative relationship with some domestic violence programs. We have a collaborative relationship with some homeless children programs, and we have some collaborative programs with other community needs. We have a relationship with what we call the Y2Y program, which was a group of Harvard students who really who saw that kids, between 19 and 27 years old that either left their house, got kicked out of their house, found themselves homeless. They were kind of really serving a population that weren't in foster care. They were on their own, but they were also on the street. And we created a sponsor-based program where we would project-base certain vouchers for certain of those beds. And it's been really, it's been a very valuable resource, both to them, but also to the agency in far as giving back to the community. The staffing, you got to take small steps in going with the staffing. Not with staffing, with MTW. You got to take really small, I feel like you got to take small steps. But at the end of the day, you are going to have to expand your skill set in technical competencies, both from analysis and program overview, as well as with just people thinking from not being a typical mom and pop PHA agency. On the operational side, people thought Papa Bear would always help them out. Well, we've kind of restructured that every site has to be financially responsible. And the other stuff, goes on as far as the public process and awareness. And it's a lot. It's not less work, but it's very satisfying, both from a job standpoint, both from a community standpoint, and both from an agency standpoint. I think, is that the last slide? Is there one more? Oh.
There's one more of how awesome it is.
So these are the benefits. We are able to, we did have funding stability. We were able to expand our program to, I think, I'm kind of both repeating myself and what other people have said. But if we were an MTW agency, we wouldn't be able to do what we had to do now. And as I said earlier, 5 years ago, what we thought we could do, what we're doing now, we had no idea that we would be doing it now 5 years ago.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that's a great lesson learned, that, start small. You think you know what you're doing. Y'all got 20 years, right? Which is a lot more than either of these 2 agencies had at the beginning. And I just really want to thank you, John, and Maria both. I think there's some really good information here, kind of lessons learned from those that have already cut their teeth with MTW. And so there are a number of questions in the chat. that I want to get to, because I think these are for Maria and John. So I'm going to take just a few minutes to try to answer some of these questions. Maria, I'm going up to the top from Rob. What software vendor do you use, Maria? I think I heard John say Yardi, Maria.
Yardi.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, we use Yardi.
You use Yardi as well. Great, thank you. And there's a couple different questions, and I think I saw Maria do a response, and I think, and we can talk about this more in the second finance webinar. But if you're Section 8 only agency, do we still have to create a separate fund for MTW in the accounting system? I think the short answer to that is yes, right? Because special purpose vouchers aren't MTW. And there's like other considerations. We're going to get really into the weeds next time about actual reporting into VMS, reporting into FDS, what that looks like. We're going to get like so far into the weeds on that piece. But the short answer to that question, I think, is yes. This is an interesting question about, and I think this is for you, Maria or John. Can you give more specifics about what you've learned about the funding cycles and the impacts on your funding?
I can start, John. We created our own 2-year tool. It's really important for you to track on at least a monthly basis and project out to know what your per unit funding amount is per HAP. So let's say it's $800, and to know what your per unit cost is, because even if you've created savings throughout the years and then you've used fungibility to use those savings to pay for something else, your costs are going to increase, your HAP costs. And in our case, the renewal percentage has not kept up with the increases in our HAP costs. So we're getting pretty close here in Southern California to where our PUC is coming up to our PUF. And as you finance people, you'll understand what that means. And so that's what we've learned, and we track it on at least a monthly basis, and we project out at least 2 years out.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo that. The PUC, we kind of look at monthly, and we also, it can be very sensitive, both on, what your true HAP costs are and what your administrative costs, but also with MTW, what's important is to really capture the non-HAP costs and to report that non-HAP costs in the VMS. There is a function within the VMS where you report your non-HAP costs, because then it provides HUD the ability to see what you're spending it on, and also provides the fuller picture. Like that non-HAP component can be a good portion of your funding.
Thanks. This is another really good question for the two of you. Thanks for your words of wisdom. That is from me and from them. Question about staffing. Is there one specific position holding down all of the MTW pieces? Did your agencies add MTW staffing to existing positions, add MTW responsibility to existing positions? Did you hire additional staff?
That's a tough one. That speaks right to change management. Both,
okay.
You can have some core, you're going to be doing things differently, and it gets into change management of your existing staff, but also how do you increase that bench strength, both wherever, from a management level, from a fiscal level, from an operations level, from a policy and technology lab level. I mean, this is really, it's a change, but that's going to be a great segue to our next piece. I know we're running short on time, but we definitely want to talk change management. But Maria, can you?
Yeah, just quickly, we added one analyst to our team that specifically does all MTW everything. We didn't add any additional staff. Again, we see it moving to work is not a program. It's not a new program, it's a designation. So it just allows you to do things differently. Thanks.
Good answer, Maria. I like that. It's okay. So there's a question in here that I'm gonna, if you want to follow up offline, There was a question for you, John, from Rachel about why your agency is switching from emphasis to Yardi. So I would say, Rachel, you have John's information is on that slide. Maybe you can reach out to him and he can talk to you directly. HUD does not advocate one vendor over another. We can't do that. You can talk to your
you can just feel free to reach
agency.
out to me directly. That's fine.
Yeah, thank you. And similar, Matt, relating the question, I'm not going to get into vendor specific, but if you do have questions, both Maria and John have their information there and you can connect with them directly. So I'd like to switch to this change management piece because I think this is going to be an interesting conversation. And Jerry, I'm wondering if maybe this might help with your last question around the impact on your agency culture. Or is it all positives? Was it all negative? Actually, before I do change management, can you guys give us each maybe 30-second impact on your agency culture as it relates to MTW? Maria?
I'm sure I talked about
it
briefly. It's extremely positive. I think our culture has shifted, again, positive. I think your thought process is different. Again, it's not, oh, we can't do that because of the regulations. Your thought process is more on what changes can we make to help make things easier for our team, for the staff, and also to help our families transition through.
John?
Yeah, no, I would, it's, once you go down this route, the tone comes from the top. Sometimes you have a choice or not a choice, but we kind of really engaged our staff and management and the board on this change. And it does, you got to take it in a positive limelight. And it is a mind shift. It's a little bit of a mind shift from, okay, typical, what I call mom and pop PHA to, and, a more you going into the new age.
Yeah.
So it was.
Let me say, even at HUD, there's a similar shift as well.
even someone with me that still likes the paper and doesn't like technology as much, but I have to deal with it, and I could be an old timer. Change is even tough for people that are engaged in change.
Yeah. So this is a great segue. We would like to talk about change management for about 5 minutes. I promise this will be quick. We'll delve a little bit deeper next time. Maria, John, you guys are amazing. Thank you for your time and your resources and your pearls of wisdom. Thank you. Thanks for plugging change management, because here we are. I'm going to send this over to Candace to kind of give us a broad overview.
Great. Thank you, Marianne. Yes, I will say change is even hard for those of us that speak about change and have expertise in change management. So, but hi, folks, I'm excited to introduce you to your first change management tool. As you start your MTW activities, as we've talked about, you'll deal with many changes. And this slide, actually, if we could back up one, provides a quick reminder of the 4 general phases to change management that we reviewed previously. So now we can move on, if you would, please. So today I just want to briefly introduce the tool that supports the first phase, building a case for change. We're going to spend a lot more time interacting with the tool at the next webinar. So today I just want to give you a quick introduction, and this tool provides 11 introspective questions. They're going to help you think deeply about the changes occurring, why they might be occurring, who will be impacted by them, what beliefs you and others hold about change, and how well received the changes are likely to be. So again, this covers 11 topics, and the goal is to help you and your colleagues really engage in thinking through the whys, whos, and hows of change early on to help facilitate that change and really make it stick. So these are kind of the major topic areas that are covered in the 11 tool. And we have shared that tool with you in advance of the webinar, but if you didn't receive it, you can find it at the link that Andalyn is going to drop in the chat. So Andalyn, if you could do that for me. And now I'm going to turn this over to Jennifer Rainwater, who's going to demonstrate how a PHA might answer just 2 of these questions, so you can get a sense of what it's like to work through this. specifically related to today's topic. So thank you, Jenny.
Thank you, Candace, and hello again, everybody. Frankly, as someone who's worked in a moving to work agency for years, although I'm not there now, I am a huge believer in the importance of change management, and I often think of it in terms of a contrast as opposed to the change managing me, because that's the thing. Sometimes you have the feeling of you're just kind of on this wild ride, but if you really have the forethought and you take the moment, it becomes really critical to the success of each and every one of the activities, the moving to work activities. Really thinking about the change that'll be coming, how it will affect your staff, what systems. I know John talked about, you know, they're switching to Yardi, and someone else spoke about their technology, but also the residents and the tenants. But, you know, as you're thinking about all those different aspects, what can you do now to pave the way to have those changes go smoothly? All of those are pieces of change management, and really taking the reins and not letting the change manage you. And thinking about it just from my work at moving to work agencies, how can you help plan for change and, frankly, break down silos, even that are occurring within your very organizations? For example, this is the landlord incentives cohort, right? So how could change management come to be when you're thinking about how do you encourage landlords to join the voucher program? The very first introspective question, right, is what's the problem, the opportunity, or the change that's happening? On the surface, that's a really quick and easy answer to answer, right? You're looking at your finance and your accounting team that are going to need to make these payments to these landlords. But when you start digging into the specifics and thinking about it, there are a lot of changes that could be happening. Not could be, will be happening. How can you think through that? How will staff know when a landlord should get payment? Is it only one payment, or should they get several? How much should it be for? How will it be documented? How will these payments be reported to HUD? Right, and that's just the very first question. If you look at question 7, you don't have to jump around on the slide. It's just, I mean, who will be impacted by this change? Obviously, it's going to impact the leasing and the inspection team, because they're mainly the ones who have really face-to-face contact. Yes, Candace. I see a raised hand. Okay. The inspection or your leasing team are probably the ones that are going to have the most face-to-face time with potential landlords in your community. So they need to know how the bonus works. What is it? How do they document it? But then there's going to have to become communication with the accounting and finance team. You know, how are they going to make the payment? How do they know how to base it? What are the required documentation that they're going to need? But don't ever forget the person at the front desk, because frankly, they're going to need to know and understand the policy, because you never know who's going to come through the front door. Is it going to be a prospective tenant? Is it going to be a possible landlord that you've been wanting to work with, who heard this thing? You know, that agency is doing that weird thing and they're paying bonuses and they want to learn about it. So they need to know what's happening so they can talk about it, and that person doesn't end up having like in-person telephone tag, right? Let them know, have them be a part of it. So just this very first really simple seeming incentive payment has a ton of change behind it. Ensure by doing this proactive change management thinking and using the introspective tool, you're making sure that you don't miss any of the key pieces, that you're on track, you're ahead of the game, that everybody knows and is aware of what's happening. And frankly, everybody is involved and has a voice in the process, right? That they feel a part of it. Change management, frankly, I'm sorry, Marianne.
Oh, I'm just looking at the clock. We're coming to the end, and I just want to make sure.
Exactly. But I'm just going to make the case for it is absolutely time well spent. Those moments when you think you don't have any time, you know, those moments, be proactive about it. But it really helps you to make those new processes work, and to make sure that if there's the possibility of this, that there's reduction of any potential resistance to the change. You're really running the show. you're the person in the engine. You know, you are really managing this piece.
That's awesome.
So anyway, I'll stop there.
And Jenny, as she indicated, was at an MTW agency when they became MTW, so she experienced this firsthand. And you heard from John, you heard from Maria, you've heard from Jenny, all three were there. And change management is key. So this is a theme we're going to be hitting again during the next webinar. We'll delve deeper into this. What we'd like to do, and we're going to give you a homework assignment that you may or may not do, but we're hoping that you'll do it. You know, no points off if you don't, is that we have this 11 question tool. It's a simple guide for you to think about all of your people and processes that are going to be affected. You heard Maria talk about them. You heard John talk about them. You heard Jenny talk about them. We're going to delve a little bit deeper into these 11 questions for your agency. So we really do recommend prior to the next webinar that you take this tool, you take it back with your team, you think about the changes that you'll be making, and you try to go through these questions to make sure that you're really kind of absorbing kind of what the changes might be and how you might do that. Again, it doesn't need to be specifically related to landlord incentives. It can be around software, it can be around the finance piece, it can be around whatever makes the most sense for you. And then we're going to be able to give you an opportunity during the next webinar to share with each other, once again, what you've learned from that exercise. So that's the assignment. Pick an activity, an MTW activity, an MTW process. Think about that activity, that process in the lens of these 11 questions, and bonus points if you are sharing some of these reflections with your team, with your internal team prior to the next webinar. And so we look forward to hearing that. So that is the high-level change management piece. Can you go to the next slide, please? I want to respect people's time. Next slide. There's a ton of resources on our website. This will be on our website. Number one, the ACC amendment, which you guys all have, the selection notice, which you've all read because you're here, the operations notice, read it, highlight it, tag it, the HUD at Work page, the HUD expansion page, the training, the online tool, the webinars, lots of really good information there. And the next slide, please. We've got some additional webinars coming up. So this is just part one. You guys asked really, really good questions. We did not get to all of them. We saw the question on RCDTF. We'll get you an answer to that. Part two of the finance is on the 23rd. The supplement, we've got a two-part supplement webinar on the April 13th and May 4th. And we've got the expansion. We heard you, Nick, on the systems stuff. So this training is going to be like the policy questions. What's the difference between the MTW expansion 5.8 versus the regular 5.8 that you guys are used to? And we'll also be having some office hours in June. So that's all the resources. That's all the questions. Thank you so much for your time. I want to know, again, if we weren't able to answer your questions, we will get back to you. If you have any suggestions for us of what you really want to hear on the next finance webinar and or what works, what didn't work with today's webinar, please let us know so that we can make the future webinars a success. Whew. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Great day. We will continue this finance conversation in a few weeks. So we truly appreciate you. We are so glad that you're here. We love MTW as much as Maria and John do. It's really exciting, and we're so happy that you're here. So thank you guys so much. Thanks to the ICF team, as well as Philip and Jenny and Eva and the training team for putting this great training together. So thanks, everybody.